And welcome to this session. I'm Davide Viaggi from the University of Bologna. You know me, I guess, by now. And I will chairing the first part of these two sessions. The first one will be based on a presentation given by Jutta Roosen that is already ready at the podium. Jutta is working at the Technical University of Munich. She's dealing with several research topics, but I understand mostly on consumer issues. And I trust this will give us an additional perspective of many of the topics on the bioeconomy that we discussed yesterday and this morning. And in addition, she's also president of the European Association of Agricultural Economists, which is something I like to highlight. The presentation will take 40 minutes or about, and we'll have some time for questions and discussion after that. So I will stop for myself now. Please, Jutta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Davide, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this very beautiful place at this very esteemed buildings. I have to start with a short disclaimer. We are actually working on a greater research project where we want to understand consumers' decision-making for newly formulated food products. And we are looking also into attention bias tests. But for this presentation today, we were not able to finish with the attention bias data. So I will mostly focus on perception-driven food choice for healthier cereal options. And this comes from a project together with Herdi Zagovi, Christina Neubig, and Matthias Staudigl, as you see here. So I'm trying to move the slides. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in this context of this conference, I want to highlight the importance of thinking also about the consumer who has to accept the innovations that are coming out of these innovation pipelines. And in particular, in the current situation, innovation-driven productivity gains are dearly needed to assure food security in the face of various challenges that put production systems and ecosystems under stress. However, I like to highlight that it is not only important that these productivity gains have to lead to more calories, but it's also about the quality of these calories and the quality of nutrition. Therefore, nutrient density and dietary quality are seen as key aspects to fight malnutrition. And we are speaking now of malnutrition in various forms, so of undernutrition and overnutrition, but also micronutrient deficiencies. In our context in Germany, where we work on food policies for an affluent society, we can see that unbalanced nutrient intakes and unhealthy diets are key risk factors for many non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular diseases, some cancers as well, and also type 2 diabetes. Unbalanced diets are a major contributor to overweight and obesity. And we have here some numbers from the WHO, and we see that this is not only a problem in affluent societies, but around the globe, also in the global south. Food value chains have an important role to play here. They provide consumers with information that should enable healthy and sustainable food choices. Food value chains are also in the midst of the process of reformulating processed foods, for instance, by reducing their fat, sugar, and salt content, all these nutrients that pose or increase certain risks and that are nutrients to limit in the diet. They enable, food value chains also enable the production of raw materials for healthy nutrition. And for that, I mean, for one, the nutrient content of specific foods, but also the alterations of different raw materials to be introduced in the diets. And we see many hold-up problems for introducing new supply chains, or also very old supply chains. If you think, for instance, about the role of pulses in modern diets. In all this context, food processing has an important role, and I have here my rusty milk cans, which is maybe not as modern as your innovation pipelines, but I want to say, okay, you have milk at the farm and you bring it to the dairy, and at the dairy you basically have an industrial process of decomposition of ingredients or content of that milk, and you put it back together in the consumption product. And that is a simple process for milk, but we of course see it in many processed food products. This idea of decomposition and recomposition. And so therefore, when we are talking about innovation for improving human diets, it's not only about breeding and, for instance, biofortification, but it's also about industrial processing technologies. And these industrial processing technologies have certain technological limitations. These come, for instance, we know that, for instance, as taste carriers, fat and sugar is very important. So, for instance, if you try to reduce fat, something that people try to do very much in the 80s, then you have at the same time other nutrients coming into the diet and into the food products to replace it, to keep the same mouthfeel of the food product, to entertain the same texture of the food product, and also to upkeep the taste. So when we think about public food policies and firm strategies, we realize that many public food policies that try to improve human diets have limited effect. People have studied a lot the role of information provision, and more recently we have seen quite a number of studies looking also at taxes or subsidies in food markets. And we see that many of these policies have only limited impact on the final human diet, and even less so on the final health outcomes of consumers. And this is possibly for two reasons. One is that consumers are highly heterogeneous in their responses to these different policy interventions. So we have heterogeneous tastes, and I will talk more about that in the context of our study, where we try to better understand this heterogeneity. The second big challenge is that there are, of course, various instruments available also for firm strategies for the response in the supply chains. And these also include prices, the way the product is composed, such as the question of new product introductions and existing product reformulations, but also the question of advertisement by firms and informative positioning of the products that influences the perception of products as healthy or not so healthy and desirable or not. So the interaction between policies and firm strategies also leads to a lowering of the effectiveness of interventions in food markets. We are focusing on the question of reformulation, and that this question of reformulation for improving processed foods is important can be seen with two factors. For one, of course, it is important to also support the share of unprocessed food in the human diet. And many researchers are also advocating that very much. But I think we also have to see our changing living condition in modern societies. So a lot of food provisioning is actually happening through packaged and processed foods. So therefore it's important. And secondly, it also shows, as on based on this graph here, that the potential by smart reformulation policies to create actually life quality gains and human life gains is actually quite high. even though at the other end, we of course see also important costs related to this reformulation. And these costs are actually through the technical cost of reformulating, but also through market share costs that are highly discussed in the literature. So what are the incentives for firms for providing actually better food products? So we are looking at this in the German context, and I have here some data from our study that we have been working on for the last couple of months, looking at children cereals. Children's cereals are breakfast cereals that are specifically addressed to children. So they usually are based on extruded products. When you look at the packaging, there may be comic figures in there. There may be toys included in the packages. And so they are also, by the way that they are introduced, the product itself is set up, it's really aimed at children. And you see here a list of different brands, and these brands were selected based on data from a German household scanner panel, the GfK, and we looked at these most important brands, trying to find nutrient information, in particular sugar, because the German reformulation and innovation strategy that was signed in 2008 is basically a voluntary agreement with the food industry to reduce certain nutrients in specific foods, and one target is children's cereal and the reduction of sugar. So when you look at these brands, one thing that I found very impressive when I first saw this graph is the amount of sugar that we have in there. So we found this nutrient information through web search, through supermarket scans and product purchases. And you see that by brand, there is something between 25 and 35 grams of sugar in 100 grams of children's cereal. So I in the beginning thought already this number by itself is quite impressive. But what is also important is that you see quite some variation. So there seems to be technical opportunities to reduce the sugar content. And we did not only look at this per brand, but we also look at this per product type. And here you see these different types of product, like you have these cinnamon squares or the choco pops and the frosted flakes, so like more the old-fashioned type. And you see, even if you look by product type, so you see still some quite some variation. So you can also do this honey pops with a lot of sugar or with less sugar. And so we see here this interaction on questions of product variety on the one hand, but also on brands that try to position themselves differently in the market. Now, when we look into the economic literature, we see, of course, a lot of studies that have been studying the effect of information, and we think that product choices are guided by something like this, by the nutrition facts panels, as we have it in the new version now in the United States, for instance, or for the European version, maybe the Nutri-Score, although I heard in Italy, they are quite critical of the Nutri-Score. But we think that with this kind of information, we actually can guide consumer decision making. However, we must also see what people are faced with in supermarkets, and they are actually faced with an entire product packaging. And you see here some examples from Germany. So we also have the Nutri-Score and some products, and we have other kind of front of pack labeling on other products and no front of pack labeling still on some other. We have nutrient claims, for instance, 30% less sugar, it says here. And it's the overall product appeal, the way the product is packaged, but also the colors and the different types of information bits and the presentation of the product itself in the consumption setting has a strong influence on how consumers may see this product, may perceive this product, and that will also influence their choices. So seeing these two different worlds, we have on the one side the studies that look at nutrient elasticities that basically look at the nutrition facts and the nutrient content of different products and try to understand how changing the formulation and changing the nutrient content would influence food demand. And on the other side, we have studies that look at specific product appeal. So one study in the first part of that literature with the nutrient elasticity is, for instance, Staudigl and Anders, that looked at the salt content in chips products in the US market, and another study for looking at the role of product appeal in willingness to taste and willingness to pay is a study by Romani et al. From 2017. In the light of Romani et al., we have also done a study using sensory perception, and I will briefly introduce that to you. But let me come to the challenges in understanding consumer choices in these markets. There's a high degree of horizontal product differentiation, so we see a large number of unique product codes. It is also unclear sometimes which attributes do consumers take into account and which should we consider in our studies. So is it actually that parents make the cereal choices for their children based on the sugar content of that cereal? And Caputo et al. Have, for instance, looked at the question, are there Q attributes that basically stand for other things than the attribute in itself and give information by inferences of consumers on these other attributes. So if we focus only on these Q attributes and not on the independent attributes, we may actually miss part of the story. So I promised I'll talk a little bit about the question of how can we actually involve consumer expectations in product choices. And we did this study with animal welfare products in a lab setting where we had a sensory experiment and a choice experiment. The study dealt with ham. So we had different ham products and they came from different production processes. So we had a ham without a label, we had a ham that came out of an organic production process, and then we had two animal welfare labels, and I don't want to go into the details. So one is called InnoPig and one is the ITW. And we asked people for their taste experiences of the unlabeled products. We also asked people for their taste expectations of the labeled products. And we asked people for their taste experiences with the full information setting where they had the taste experience plus the label. And here you see the results. So on the four left columns are the situation without the label. So this is just tasting experiences. And because we asked the same butcher to prepare all the hams from the different production processes for us, and the cooking of the ham is actually what determines the flavor of the ham in the end, there was basically no difference, also not experienced by our people. And we had about 120 people, I think, tasting these hams. Then we told them, okay, here you see different hams in 4 packages with these labels put on there. And you see there's a strong gradient. So the organic ham is perceived or is expected to taste best. And the conventional, the no label ham is expected to bring the least taste satisfaction, so to say. And we see what happens when people have this information when they taste the ham. So it does not only impact expectations, but it also impacts what people in the end experience. So part of that differentiation in taste expectation transfers to the actual experience, so that we have significant difference in the taste experience with the labeled products between the conventional one, the animal welfare one that are then not distinguished, and the organic ham. So expectations do matter, not only because they are expectations, but also they carry over to experiences. So in the study I want to present today, we also wanted to look at consumers' perception and expectation of taste and how that matters for consumer food choices. And we want to understand the heterogeneity in perception and in the evaluation process. And this study now is not on ham, but it is about cereals and a particular type of cereals. It's about mueslis. So these basically having the whole grain inside. So we want to understand how taste expectations drive food product choice and how this is related to the attribute levels. And we distinguish between extrinsic attributes that are basically forming expectation and its intrinsic attributes that are also mattering for the actual experience. We measure information on taste expectations and hedonic liking, and we also measure product choice. So in the next few slides, I show you what we do. So we focus on mueslis, and because of the large share of chocolate mueslis in the German market for breakfast cereals, as I can show you in some market data, just a few slides ahead. So we have these mueslis and we want to measure extrinsic attributes and intrinsic attributes. So we base our muesli selection on market search based on the GfK household scanner data from 2017. And we selected 24 products in 3 different types and 6 brands with variant nutrient claims that we want to assess in there. We want to describe taste expectations and hedonic liking. And for that, we developed a repertoire of sensory descriptors. So for instance, do you expect this muesli to taste sour, bitter, sweet, and so on? And we developed this repertoire in focus group. This repertoire, we will have in the end 12 different descriptors were measured by kata measures. Kata stands for check all that applies. So basically just a check for these 12 sensory repertoire words that people have to say, yes, that applies in this case. And then we also had an hedonic liking measure on a 9-point scale as typical. And we evaluated all those quantitatively in an online survey with 2 groups, each evaluating 12 products. And we had about 170 to 180 people in each group. Then we also wanted to measure choice, and we looked at choice in a discrete choice experiment with these originally selected 24 mueslis in 72 choice sets that were arranged in 3 blocks of binary force choice. So we did not have none of these alternatives in this setting. And the choice experiment was then done by all 350 consumers in our sample. The consumer came actually from an online access panel from a market research company and were selected regarding certain quotas on age, gender, and education composition. Yeah, so here you see a chart that describes a little bit the muesli market in Germany. We have 565 unique product identifiers in the cereal market in Germany. And here you see these 40% cereals. So the children's cereal I showed before are part of that part. And these are these extruded things like cornflakes and stuff like that, and frosted flakes. And here you have the mueslis, and the muesli basically have the whole grain. And you see here, so the chocolate muesli, our Italian colleague who was participating and the guest researcher at the time, she was very impressed by the chocolate muesli selection in German supermarkets. So this is also a bit of the focus and how it came into the study. Next to the chocolate muesli, we have crunchy muesli. And here there are crunchy muesli like with honey flavor, but we also have chocolate crunch. And that's why we selected also the chocolate crunch mueslis. And then we have the fruit mueslis sort of as the healthy alternative to that. We can see that we basically have 66 brands and sub-brands. We have 2 main national brands, and we have 4 main retail brands in the German market. And we excluded on purpose specialty muesli and organic muesli because the market is a bit different, because then you have the specialty outlets of organic stores, and they have the retail brand for these organic stores, so it would become a bit complicated. So we looked at the conventional market basically. So first we developed the sensory repertoire, and for that, in the times of COVID, we did online focus groups with 6 participants each. We shipped these 3 muesli types of one major national brand to our 12 participants of the focus group, and during the focus group they had to taste and describe these mueslis, and we asked them to prepare the muesli in a way they would usually do for breakfast, namely with milk or similar. And we tried to collect as many as possible descriptive adjectives. So here you see the number that we got. So the group 2 was a bit more creative in creating words than the group 1. And we then kind of condensed them to fewer words. And in this condensement, we were trying to have sufficient relevance for all the different muesli types, chocolate, crunchy, and fruit, but also to make sure that they somehow apply and are not like very specific words that only apply to very few product types. So everything was conducted in German, and therefore we use the ISO norms for translation these words now for the presentation here. And in terms that these terms do not, in case the terms do not exist in the normal sensory repertoire, I consulted the Oxford Shorter Dictionary. So here's the repertoire of sensory descriptors that our subject in the focus group came up with, from bitter, sweet, crispy, sour, insipid, and soft, to chewy, cereal, coarse, acid, harmonious, and intensive. So in subgroups of 170 people, they evaluated this with a check all that apply method for 12 products each. And here you see the outcome of that. And you see that these mueslis are quite differentiated. The ABC shows significant differences after an ANOVA post hoc test. And so the crunchy muesli, somehow the orange ones stick out a little bit for being sweet and crispy, but also the fruit muesli stick out for being more soft and also acidic, which is an important property of that is applied here to the fruit mueslis. Then we asked people to join our discrete choice experiment with 24 muesli products. So these are not only 12 in the subgroups, but now we have a choice design of 24 products, and we had 6 major brands, 3 types per brand. So for all brands, we have chocolate, crunchy, and fruit muesli, and we added then some specialty types where we had claims of no added sugar, sugar reduced, dark chocolate, and so on the package. So in the survey setup in the online experiment, people did this attention bias test, which I will be talking about. Then they did the choice experiment here, and then they did the kata. Because of the setup of the design, we have basically 350 participants doing 24 choice experiments each. So we have 16,800 observations. If we want to look at individual kata, because some of the choice sets covered both subgroups of muesli types, actually our number of observations in the choice experiment reduced to 4,400, so about a fourth, and that is because of the overlap between the choice experiment and the kata that is happening here. And we actually analyzed the data now for the entire choices using mean evaluation for the kata and the hedonic liking. But we also worked with a reduced sample of observation in the choice experiment to see what happens if we introduce individual assessment rather than mean assessment per product type. We do that in a typical multinomial logit model for the choice analysis. And here you see the list of different determinants, the price, the type, where our base category is the fruit muesli, the brand where our base category is one national brand, the Vitalis brand. We have liking, or the average liking, denoted as M liking. We have labels that are on the food products, and we have these kata categories, or the average assessment of the product denoted as M kata. Yes, so this is what the estimation looks like, and it goes over 3 pages because it's quite long with all the different determinants we have. So let me first say, okay, here on the left side in blue, we have the label version. So we consider what is written on the package. And in the green side, we have what people perceive. So how do they assess as sour, as sweet, as cereally, and so on. That's denoted by the kata. So when we take the mean value for liking and kata, then we can actually use both subsamples. So we have 16,800 observations as written in this line. If we now do the individual evaluation by people in terms of liking or kata, our sample size reduces to about 4,400. Also down here, you see the number of correct predictions, and you see that including individual liking and individual kata evaluation improves quite a lot, the number of correct prediction, which is also maybe not so surprising because of course they pick up a lot of the heterogeneity in the data. So one thing to remark about these different types of models, and we estimated a couple of more models and are still doing the analysis, but what is remarkable is that the marginal utility of income, the price coefficient, is fairly stable across all specification of the model, which gives us some confidence that the price is one important determinant that is consistently driving consumer choices. Yeah, we see here also in the different phase, we see the impact of liking on the product choices. And one thing that already sticks out is when we look at this group here, M liking plus M kata. So then the type of muesli, crunchy and fruit versus, no, crunchy and chocolate versus fruit is picking up, is becoming more significant and larger as an impact, and also the liking coefficient is becoming larger. So now I want to talk about these attributes versus katas, or labels versus katas, and here you see the impact of the different labels. So this is a long regression output, you can imagine, and we see here, just to highlight a little bit, what I find quite interesting is that a cereal labeled as less sweet is increasing choice probability, has higher choice probability, while labeling a product without added sugar doesn't seem to have an impact on choice likelihood. So there seems to be some preference in the German society for less sweet cereal options, and we also see that in the kata choices here on the right hand side. So here we have the descriptor sweet, and that leads to a negative effect on the utility and the choice probability. What you also see when we use the when you look further down here, it depends a little bit of whether we take the average descriptor in the sample. Sorry, too much at the same time. The average descriptor in the model. So for instance, for chewy and acid, the average has a significant impact. When we take the individual descriptors, then the question whether a cereal appears cereally as an adjective or intensive seems to have an impact. Then we have here the different types again. We had them also on the first slide, crunchy chocolate versus fruit, and the different brands. And we see here what we saw already on the first brand, that when we use average values for liking and kata, or the sensory properties, then this increases the role of type and brand in size and significance. In comparison to the fact when we use individual evaluations of liking and kata. And I think that has something to do is that when you think about the preference space and the different attributes in preference space, then by taking mean values across the entire samples, you basically try to span the space by going to more extreme values on these vectors, and therefore showing this increase in these parameters. So yeah, ongoing research, but I'm coming to sum up. Yeah, we see a large variety of highly differentiated food products in modern consumer markets, and this makes it necessary to understand the heterogeneous consumer response to marketing strategies and public food policies. We see that overall, these public interventions to address public health goals have limited impact because of these heterogeneous responses, and that has been observed in many settings. We think that in this competitive market environment, where firms also act strategically, consumers are not only influenced by objective nutrition information, by nutrient content and FOP labels, but by a lot of marketing information that has a major role in forming these product perception, taste expectation, and then also final taste experiences. So in our results, we see that muesli brands and types capture part of this heterogeneity, but not all of it. But also the sensory preference profiles matter quite a bit, as in this evaluation of the sweetness or less sweetness in these cereals. In the literature on food reformulation, there is a lot of discussion on this hypothesis of the unhealthy tasty intuition. So an unhealthy food product is expected to taste good, or something that is tasting good cannot be healthy at the same time. So this is kind of the intuitive judgment. I think actually sometimes this literature, it's a very sexy proposition, but I don't think it's actually holding true in many contexts. So our result on the less sweet labeling seems to support that. Also, the sweetness appreciation in our sample seems to support that people are not necessarily always looking for more sugar. And also the study by Staudigl and Anders didn't find evidence for this intuition. So it's not to say it's not there, but it's maybe not driving the entire market. Yeah, so we want to further study the role of product appeal using intentional bias tests, and we included in the study a dot probe test, and are still going on with the analysis. And of course, highlighting the heterogeneity of consumers makes it necessary to also extend our multinomial logit model maybe to more flexible forms. The random parameters loaded model doesn't seem to be the most promising avenue in that. So we are looking at latent class models here to further investigate preference heterogeneity across consumers. And with that, I thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.